No lung disease.
Dr. Fred Coster was on call at the University Hospital in Albuquerque, Memorial Day weekend 1993. He would be one of the high-risk people in this outbreak, treating more victims than any other doctor. The more patients, the more Dr. Coster started to see signatures of the disease, a blood smear with a purple cast.
Very concentrated red cells, we think, is due to a massive leak of fluid and protein into the lungs. Probably only into the lungs.
The hospital pathologist called her students in to take a look.
Just had trouble coming up with anybody who had experience with this occurring before.
And sometimes there were more subtle signs.
Typhoid fever has a look about it. The patient comes in, they look ill, they're slightly bent over, their eyes are half closed. These patients had typhoid look. You saw it in their eyes.
We don't even know whether it works or not.
CDC arrived in New Mexico on May 29th. The team that would battle the mystery illness was now in place. Some of the best minds in epidemiology, virology, and infectious disease. While they were in the meeting, they received news that a little girl suspected of having the disease had died.
It really brings the pain and the tragedy of an illness like this home, and spending the time that we had to with the family afterward, asking, in all fairness, some really intrusive questions. This was an illness that we didn't understand, that we didn't have a name for it, we didn't know how it was transmitted, that was disproportionately affecting young adults.
Word of the new disease found its way to the media. Because so many of the cases were Navajo, the media gave it a new name, the Navajo disease.
Already, we're stereotyped. We're portrayed as very negatively in the media. And then for something else like this to come along saying that this is a Navajo disease, that just perpetuates that stereotype.
Navajo children visiting pen pals in LA weren't allowed off the bus. Restaurants were denying people service. A couple on the way to Alaska were denied entrance at the Canadian border. Rumor had it that New Mexico's tourism was in trouble. Marshall Plummer, vice president of the Navajo Nation, held a press conference to counter the attacks.
When the Legionnaires' disease broke out, there was no talk about quarantining Philadelphia. There was no talk about staying away from children of people who have this disease. And it's unfortunate that my people are being treated this way.
They closed their doors and windows and refused to speak to anyone.
And that caused us problems with our investigation because we were having people that were reluctant to talk to health officials because of all this publicity that had been gathered.
In the weeks that followed, the mystery illness gained worldwide attention. Where did it come from? How did it get there? This wasn't the kind of thing that was supposed to happen in the United States. In infectious disease is the #1 killer of all living things. It's been with us since the beginning of time, and it will be here after we've gone. Scientists say when it infects humans, it's usually by accident. We're a dead end. It can't grow and flourish in us. It can't proliferate in the environment through us. It can only cause us sickness, and in severe cases, death. Every year, more than 17 million people die from infectious disease. It's become a fact of life in our picture of third world countries, sad and distant. But in October 1992, a 19-member committee of scientists commissioned by the Institute of Medicine published a startling report on emerging infections.
Solid rocket ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Endeavour.
It said the United States, this state-of-the-art country that can send people into space and operate on a fetus still in the womb, is virologically speaking a time bomb waiting to be devastated by infectious disease. Old diseases we thought we had eradicated decades ago are coming back. Tuberculosis, once committing thousands to sanatoriums, has infected 285,000 people in the United States since 1985. 15,000 of them children.
Okay, open the airplane for me.
And as odd as it may seem, there are still reports of plague, cholera, whooping cough, tetanus, and diphtheria here every year. Of all the diseases we have faced in the history of the world, only smallpox has been successfully eradicated. The World Health Organization is closing in on polio. But measles is on the upswing again. And with modern transportation, scientists warn that no disease is more than a plane ride away from the United States. We're importing them every day. Better surveillance is needed to keep them out. But we can't blame it all on other countries. The United States is perfectly capable of creating its own. As the emerging infections report continues, there are many points in our farmer-to-consumer food chain where safety can be compromised, resulting in outbreaks of food-borne illnesses. Our constant overuse of drugs, especially antibiotics, could lower our immune system's resistance to bacteria. And if we continue to cut down rainforests, we could put ourselves in contact with more and more new diseases. One more thing. The 1992 report concluded that while many of these diseases may be prevented, the committee was confident new diseases would emerge, although it was impossible for them to predict the time and place. 7 months later in the southwestern United States, they were proven right. On June 3rd, 300 medicine men met for 5 hours to perform healing ceremonies for victims of the mystery illness. There were now 19 cases. 12 victims had died. And the disease was beginning to spread to other parts of the Southwest: Utah, Nevada, Texas. The families were victims too. This young husband rushed his wife to the emergency room. Her x-rays were clear when they went in. 3 hours later, she was fighting for air.
They were pretty worried because they didn't know what type. They thought at this time it was pneumonia, and they never seen pneumonia work as quickly as it did. They said, so this type or the pneumonias that they took 3 or 4 days to be at this level, and it took a very short time of 2 to 3, 4 hours, 3 hours exactly actually. And so they had to put her under because she was fighting them. But I think the reason why she was fighting them is because the lack of oxygen that she was getting, and her heart stopped.
No one understood why she got sick. Her husband and daughter were both fine. CDC began a case control study to come up with answers. The mortality rate was now a staggering 77%.
basically,
Things were heating up at the state health department. Scientists were holding 2 press conferences a day.
each of these cases really is an investigation unto itself, because
We, by that time, had the state government's health departments from 4 states involved. The medical school, the Department of Health in New Mexico, Indian Health Service, the Office of Medical Investigators, Scientific Laboratory Division, and 3 different divisions of the Centers for Disease Control were all involved. But the thing that I remember most was just the extreme pressure of trying to find an answer and to reassure folks.
Some families were hit harder than others. 1 week after the first victim died on the way to his fiancee's funeral, his brother and sister-in-law moved into his trailer. The next weekend, his brother-in-law came down with the disease.
The interesting thing about this first gentleman is that his wife was staying with him in the intensive care unit at the time. And I saw her every day. I asked her, "How are you feeling?" And she said, "Fine." And this went on for 3 days. And then when he was being discharged, because he was a relatively mild case, was recovering, he had no idea what it was, but he seemed getting better. I looked at that wife and said, "You don't look terribly well." And she said, "Well, I have to confess, the last 3 days I had these terrible muscle aches." She went through a very severe progression of disease. It was extremely ill. In fact, we thought that we were not going to be able to save her.
If 4 people in the same household could come down with the disease, did it mean it was contagious? And if it was, why didn't the baby who lived with them get sick? Back at their home base in Atlanta, CDC scientists put their other projects on hold to focus on the outbreak. Laboratories all over the complex were testing the victims' blood and tissue samples against all the old world diseases, including the deadliest strains in the Special Pathogens Unit. Dr. Tom Kaisak, Chief of Diagnostics, Dr. Pierre Roland, Chief of Pathogenesis, and Dr. Stuart Nickel, Chief of Molecular Biology, would step to the forefront of the battle.
We didn't really believe, I think, initially that it was likely to end up being one of the agents that we're used to handling, quite frankly.
and then we start to test against our own viruses, and not because the symptomatology was something like we used to see, but just to be sure that we will never miss something.
They began with serological tests, putting samples of diseases into wells and adding victim serum to them. If the victims had antibodies to the disease, the sign they'd been exposed, the wells would turn green. The testing continued for a week. Nothing. And then Dr. Roland saw a reaction in the wells where he had put samples of hantaviruses.
We had something which looks like, smell like, but not exactly the right answer.
It was just a reaction, not a confirmation. But if this was a hantavirus, they at least knew what they were dealing with. They knew there were 20 strains of hantaviruses sprinkled around the world, 5 or 6 of them deadly. All were carried by rodents. 2 had even been seen in the United States before, but so far, they had not been found to cause disease. The first hantavirus to be discovered, the Hantan, was named for the river where it surfaced during the Korean War. 3,000 UN soldiers were infected. Victims had headaches, muscle aches, and fever with skin hemorrhages. Waste collected in their blood, causing kidney damage. If the mystery illness in New Mexico was a hantavirus, why was it attacking its victims' lungs instead of kidneys? Scientists at CDC second-guessed themselves, but the serological tests kept producing a reaction. Now it was time for the molecular biology department to take over with DNA testing.
We went to the big computer databases of known sequences, genetic sequences for the hantaviruses, to design genetic probes, really, to see if we can detect those types of sequences in this material, the autopsy material from these first few patients. And using a technique which is called polymerase chain reaction of PCR amplification, so that you can see the DNA sequences, you can see the piece of DNA that you've amplified up from the virus that was present in the tissues.
They worked around the clock, looking for the fingerprint and its genetic code that only a hantavirus would have.
When I came into my office in the morning, I had a little note on my desk at 3:30 a.m. It looks like it might be a hantavirus. Yes. Still got a book on my wall in the office.
But this wasn't just another hantavirus. It was a brand new one.
This really was a newly recognized virus. That was very exciting. It's not very often in your career that you come across a really new virus like this, one that had not been seen, was not known to science before. So it was a big moment.
Once they were sure it was a hantavirus, even though it was a new breed, they assumed it was being transmitted the same way. It wasn't contagious. It was carried in rodent urine, saliva, and feces. By mid-June, they had a task force of volunteers from state and Indian environmental agencies, combing the countryside, trapping every rodent they could find.
The trap is closed. Something inside.
Some wood rats and squirrels tested positive, but the main carrier turned out to be a cute little mouse with big eyes and ears known as Peromyscus maniculatus, or the deer mouse. It's been a constant figure in the Southwest for centuries, but the Southwest isn't its only home. Its territory extends from Canada to the Hudson Bay, all the way into parts of Mexico. In short, except for a section in the southeast, it lives everywhere in the rural United States. If they thought they had confined it to the Southwest, they now realized a chilling thought. If all deer mice carried the virus, it could turn into a nationwide epidemic. Back in Atlanta, Luann Elliott put on her work clothes and headed into level 4. The sounds you're hearing are from a wireless microphone replaced in your spacesuit, along with a small camera. Besides the scientists, no one has ever had this view of level 4 before. When laboratory technicians in Asia worked with 2 of the other hantaviruses for a matter of minutes, they became infected.
The only way you can develop an antiviral drug is to know all the insides of the virus. And so that's what we're doing, is to grow it and study it and try to find enough about it to be able to fight it.
Luann would be working day in and day out directly with what had killed the victims: mice urine, feces, and saliva.
And we've gotten most of the virus out of the throat swabs, more than in the urine so far. This is the most difficult virus I've ever tried to isolate, because it would grow well in animals, but it wouldn't adapt to grow in tissue culture. We almost have to have it grow in tissue culture to be able to get the volumes of reagents that we need.
While Luann worked at CDC, another team of microbiologists at the Army Research Lab was also trying to isolate the virus. They both succeeded within 5 months. Luann would continue her work with the mice to try and find out how long they carry the virus, and hopefully to learn how they transmit it. Once the virus was identified, things began to happen quickly. Doctors in New Mexico were being bombarded with information on hantaviruses. They began treatments with ribavirin, an antiviral drug that had proven effective against one of the other strains. And 2 scientists at the University of New Mexico got to work on a diagnostic test to help physicians positively confirm whether or not someone had the virus. But the test took 24 hours to perform. Some patients died in 4, and ribavirin didn't show dramatic results. The virus had been identified. Surviving the new strain of hantavirus seemed to depend on how quickly patients got medical care. Doctors at local clinics began to use airplanes to send their patients to University Hospital. 3 days after he came down with symptoms, a man who had cleaned mice feces from his garage a week earlier was on the plane. His wife did not get sick.
I only thought it was only flu.
When I would talk to the nurses and some of the doctors, a lot of it was the nurses though, they would say that you were lucky to get him in when you did because he wasn't under a lot of distress. You got him in right before he got the full impact and we were able to start the medicine right away.
The woman who had been stricken by the disease while her husband was in intensive care recovered too. They were beginning to get a foothold on the disease.
If they made it through the first 12 hours, or the first 24 hours, then they would survive. So this was rapid in and rapid out. Either death was rapid or recovery was relatively rapid, all within a 5 or 6 day period.
By July, scientists involved in the hantavirus outbreak had some of their answers. They knew what the disease was and how it was transmitted. The only big question left was,